This is a recording from the BC Humanist Association's online event, Humanism and End of Life. Humanism is a progressive worldview that, without supernaturalism, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead meaningful, ethical lives capable of adding to the greater good of humanity. To learn about humanism and to support our work, visit bchumanists.ca and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and to subscribe to this podcast. So I'm just going to say a couple quick words. Thanks everyone for coming. So I'm Emily Fagan. I am the Director of Outreach for the BC Humanist Association. And tonight's panel is on humanism and end of life. So I just want to start by acknowledging that tonight I am coming to you from the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Westanek peoples, whose historic relationships with the land continue to this day. I am grateful for the opportunity to be coming to you from this shared territory, although I was not invited to do so. So given tonight's turnout, everyone except for our speakers has been muted to prevent just any inadvertent accidental interruptions. But during the Q&A portion, towards the end of tonight's event, feel free to throw any questions you might have in the chat, and those will be moderated by me. And obviously be respectful to one another and our speakers. Our speakers tonight include Jennifer Malms, and co-director of the End of Life Doula Association of Canada, and Cindy Oxenberry, the president of the Memorial Society of British Columbia. We would like to thank Elaine McDonald, who was originally scheduled to speak tonight from the End of Life Doula Association, but unfortunately was unable to join us tonight. She was very helpful in consulting on our recently released guides that Sophie, our director of campaigns, will be speaking out later. But yes, we would just like to take a moment to acknowledge Elaine's hard work. So we're recording this talk tonight, and it will be released on our YouTube channel and podcast later sometime next week. So look for that if there's anything you want to go back and re-listen to. Our next special virtual event, a talk on cults by Matthew Remdemski, is coming up very soon on November 19th. Keep an eye on our newsletter and social media for more information on how to RSVP very soon. And starting with Cindy, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their work in relation to end-of-life care and how they first got involved.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you very much for having me here tonight. I'm really thrilled to be here with Jennifer and Emily and Sophie, and to talk about end of life and what that looks like from the perspective of the Memorial Society and what it is that we do. So if you don't know who we are a secular organization. We provide independent information about reasonably priced funeral services, and we promote planning well in advance of death so that our members, so we're a membership model, we're an advocacy organization, so members and their next of kin can move with confidence and comfort in dealing with end-of-life obligations. So we take a very pragmatic approach. We look at the industry of death care and the corporate side of it, and we try to make sure that individuals get what they want and what they need in whatever way they want and in whatever way they need. So that's incredibly important to us. I've been with the organization on the board for 4 years now, and I joined when my father died at home, and we thought we were ready. We're like many people, we thought we were ready. We thought we knew what we were doing. And when the moment arrived, the moment came about when he died, we didn't actually know, we were stuck. We didn't know what to do. And having the one thing to do, which was to call the Memorial Society and say, my father has just passed away, and to have them be there and respond and answer that question and help us with just one next step. That's what we needed to do. And after that happened, I realized that this is a really valuable service to provide to the people of British Columbia. So we're a BC organization. We have tens of thousands of members over the lifetime of the organization that's been around since 1964. There have been over 250,000 members. So we provide that service to British Columbia. And I look forward to telling you more about that as we talk today.
Thank you so much. And Jennifer?
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Cindy, for all your hard work over there at the Memorial Society. We too, at the End of Life Doula Association of Canada, support early planning and helping people get the experience that they desire and helping them make it unique. So we're not just we're not cookie cutter people, and there shouldn't be a cookie cutter way to die or have your funerals happening. It can be a very unique and very thought out and well planned process, and that will help not just the person who is dying, but the families that are left behind. Um, for those of you who don't know what an end of life doula is, I recognize a few faces, and I did speak once in person to your group. I think it was last year. But an end of life doula is a person who helps a family and an individual who is facing a life limiting illness. We help with empowering them to make choices, educating them on what those choices could be, and encouraging them to really take hold of the process and be involved in the process of making informed decisions and preparing space for these conversations so that emotional decision making and last minute decisions aren't having to be made, because once you take once you have these conversations, you have time to really think about it. And at the last minute, there's not a lot of times. And when there's not a lot of time, your options do get narrower. The association was established in 2017 by myself and colleague Sarah Muxlow, who's a social worker. I got into this work back in the 90s. I had been with a few family members that had died. My family never kept me away from death, so I was very comfortable with it, and I saw how it could be wonderful and beautiful, and I saw how it could be ugly and disjointed. And I went into nursing school thinking that I was going to be a nurse working in palliative care. I quickly found huge gaps and a lack of education in this area, lack of awareness in this area. So I said, okay, I'm getting out of nursing school, and I went on to do a gerontology degree and focused on death and dying from Simon Fraser University. So that's what I've done, and now I'm looking. My dog is barking. I'm sorry. Narrowing it down even further, knowing that things will change with policy changes. So I'm now pursuing my master's in social policy from Athabasca University, and it's so that we can really raise the standard of end-of-life care here in Canada. That's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I think that's really great. So I just want to give our campaigns manager, Sophie Burke, the opportunity to speak a little bit to her background, along with the resources and research that we've recently launched, and why now is a critical time for me. Let's go ahead, Sophie.
Yeah, so my personal background is in healthcare and health ethics, and I work both with BC Humanism Association and Vancouver Coastal Health, doing education about medically assisted death and also end-of-life care. And that navigation can be really complicated for people, so providing that education is so important. And the true reason why BCHA has decided to do this panel and decided to provide this education, because we really believe that everyone gives meaning to their own life and is deserving and respectful of having a death and a life that is in accordance with their values. And by providing that education, it can really make it possible for people to do so. And now is such an important time to be talking about end-of-life issues, specifically about medically assisted dying, which is just one component of end-of-life care, because medically assisted dying was legalized in 2016 and now is kind of being returned to legislature for some new decisions for an update. And a few key pieces for everyone to know about that is that the new laws will reduce barriers. We talk a little bit about this in the blog post, but it will reduce barriers like waiting periods, extraneous witnesses, to be able to have people make that request sooner. Provides people with non-reasonably foreseeable death, so people living with ALS or MS, to apply. And it also allows for advance directives. And why this is so important is because it allows for people who were previously ineligible to apply to submit a patient request record, and they may now be eligible for a medically assisted death should they wish that be a component of their end-of-life care. This is really why we're talking about it, and we hope that people can consider all their end-of-life options and prepare for that.
Absolutely. So our first question, going to Jennifer first, has working so closely with MAID changed the way you see your career or other areas in your life?
That's a good question. And when I started doing this work and when I wrote the program for Douglas College, I wrote the End of Life Doula certificate program for them. MAID wasn't on the table. It was definitely something that I never thought that we would even get to. And when it came to the table, it definitely, I'm not going to say it increased business, but it increased the number of conversations. It gave some people something to talk about, where people weren't okay with talking about death and dying before, but here's a topic on the table and people want to make an opinion, whether it's I support it or I don't support it or I want to know more about it. So when medical assistance in dying came into play in June of 2016, I definitely had way more conversations about death and dying. It was like the door had opened just a little bit. Not so much that everybody wanted to choose it or people were like, really interested in it in that sense. It's just, it was something to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Cindy, how about yourself?
So we don't take a position. We want to support anybody who wants to do advanced planning, and we want to support people around doing. I think it's interesting, sort of all of our different perspectives, and they do all come together, and it's really about supporting people to do what they want to do in the way they want to do it, in the way they want to either leave this life the way they want. We're about planning and what happens sort of at the point of death, but also afterwards as well. We have more discussions. I think I would agree with Jennifer that there are maybe more discussions and that there's been a heightened awareness around if there's an ability to plan something, right, then I think a lot more people are interested in planning that. And so that probably has made a difference. Anytime we can get people having the conversation and becoming more comfortable with the topic, they're going to be looking at the kinds of services that we can be providing. So we like to encourage people to have those conversations. I can't say that there was a very specific impact for us.
Absolutely, yeah. So starting this time with Cindy, my next question is, in your experience, what impact has the legalization of MAID in Canada had since the policy was enacted? So just ways that you've seen it impact communities.
Yeah, I think that, again, there's more conversations going on for sure. And I think the services around it, there's definitely more attention around what kind of services do we need to be putting in place. But again, from our perspective, we're not really at that. We're not really sort of at that sort of connection point around it. And the people that we work with, we often don't necessarily know what kinds of plans they've made or whether it's something that they're considering, whether it's on their radar. We just know that they're people that are interested in planning in advance and ensuring that there's the advocacy perspective from a consumer perspective for us, right? To ensure that people are comfortable with what it is they have planned and that they have everything in place, and the people that need to know what they want to have happen, that information is available. And that's another one of the services that we provide to members. They can come to us and they can say, and this is where it becomes very incredibly valuable when it comes to MAID, is that they can come to us and say, put on file what it is they want to have happen and be really specific about it, or be as general as they want. But if there is something that they want to have happen, they can come to us and put that on file, and then we'll make sure that it's available to the family when the time comes, so that there aren't discussions, there aren't arguments. There isn't any conflict around that kind of thing, because I think, again, around the planning, the last thing you want to do is create problems for your family, problems for your friends, and so being able to be really clear about your wishes is important, but also to make sure that everybody has access to that as well.
Yeah, 100%. What about you, Jennifer? Have you seen an impact since legalization?
Yes, I definitely have seen an impact. And at first, I'm just going to share a little bit of experience that I have found. At first, when it was rolled out, I'm not sure if it was rolled out in a way that was thoughtful of all of the pieces that fit. So what I was finding was that nurses and doctors weren't sure if they could opt out or opt in. So there was some miscommunication there. I know that there was a lack of grief support for this type of death. I mean, this is a very unique type of death, and families weren't all in agreement. You hear the stories of everybody's gathered around the bed or the sofa or whatever, and MAID is administered, and the family is happy and everybody's good. But then there's the brother in the hallway, or the brother that's left because they're angry and they couldn't understand why somebody would choose this. So I don't know if there was enough supports around that piece. Now, that being said, there have been some initiatives made since it rolled out. So nurses and doctors and pharmacists are able to opt in or opt out. They're not forced into it. I know there's still some controversy about having it occur in hospice. And what I like to tell people to think about if they're angry about that is that hospices were actually developed by churches. They were run by nuns. So I'm one of those people who likes to look at both sides. It's whose rights do you infringe on? Do you infringe on the person who wants to have MAID, or do you infringe on the people who set up the home? So there was that, and there has been some changes to that as well. And there is good grief support through the website Bridge C14, which is a grief and bereavement resource specifically for people whose family member or friend has chosen medical assistance in dying, and that those things have definitely lessened the impact for sure. The negative impact, I mean, the positive impact, it being that people are having a choice of how they want their last few moments, days, or they get to pick a specific time. And I think that is the biggest impact, that people have choice. And I love when people have choice. And I just wanted to mention that the End of Life Doula Association doesn't take a stand on it either. Like Cindy said, from the Memorial Society, each individual doula will choose or not choose to support persons who want to utilize medical assistance in dying.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So as it currently stands, what do each of you see as the biggest challenges someone might face in trying to access medical assistance in dying? Starting with you, Jim.
I think I just mentioned some of that. The biggest barrier, I guess, is lack of information and going to the right resources. And that's one thing that we do as doulas, is we help find you the accurate information and the accurate resources. There are places in Canada where it's really hard to get a doctor to come and sign off on those things. In Vancouver, and especially on the island, the medical assistance in dying program has been quite smooth. And there are doctors and nurses and pharmacists that are willing to participate. And there are witnesses that are willing to come and witness the paperwork, whereas in some places, maybe in a small community, or in a community that might not agree, maybe the community is quite Catholic, or it could be First Nations or whatnot, it might be hard to get someone in there to help out with that.
Yeah, totally. What's your perspective on this, Cindy?
Yeah, I think that I always come back to education, right? I always come back to education. What sort of resources are available? How can people understand what their options are? And also how can they understand what some of the challenges might be? So speaking to what Jennifer said about the grief process, right? So is this different? In what way is it different? What do I need to do to prepare my family? What do I need to do to prepare myself? I see that as very similar to the challenges that we try to address through the Memorial Society, right? Is educating people, helping them understand what their options are, and that there are any number of ways of approaching sort of your final wishes or your end of life, and that there's no right or wrong way. Every family is going to come at it differently. People are going to have challenges negotiating that, but where do they get the support for it? So I think that echoes pretty much what Jennifer is saying around support and also around the education piece.
Yeah, and what Cindy said, getting it in advance, like I think Cindy and I will be both beating the same drum, do things in advance and know where those supports are before the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. So those in end-of-life circles might have heard a lot about how someone must have the capacity to or capability to consent to a medical assisted death. What does that mean in practice? Starting with Cindy.
I think that's a Jennifer question. I think in terms of because that wouldn't be something that we would be there for, but I would think that's very much Jennifer's area.
Totally. All right. So Jen.
So a person needs to have the capacity to give consent right up until 10 minutes before the procedure happens. So at the time of the request, at the time that they start the 10-day process, or when they make the appointment to actually set the date. And the date needs to be set within the 3 months of doing an application. It does expire. It can get renewed, but it does expire. And I've seen this with one of my clients who set a date for her birthday and didn't realize that her paperwork was expired and had to go through all the process again. What did I miss? I lost it. It was consent. So 10 minutes before, while after, or around the time that they are putting the IVs in a person to get ready for the drugs to be administered, they will ask again, is this what you want? And the person needs to be able to give consent. Now, what that means in practice is that person cannot be on any pain medication at the time. Anything that would make them kind of loopy or not 100% in capacity would alter their ability to give consent. And the law at this point says that you need to be able to give consent. And I know that that is a part of the new law that they're trying to push through, is that you'd be able to put it in your advanced care plan and plan towards it. But at this time, that is not what's happening. You need to be able to give consent. And some people, because if they've been in pain and they're afraid of pain, they don't want to feel that. And that enough will stop them from making the decision to utilize medical assistance in dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So we have a couple of questions, each directed at each of you. So we're going to start with Cindy. So what are some new options for memorials and celebration of end-of-life services for non-religious people that didn't exist 20 years ago? Can you speak to the role of the Memorial Society as a secular institution born from the Unitarian Church in this?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because things have changed so much. What we see in terms of cremation compared to the, even 10, 15 years ago. And so that really opened up a number of different opportunities for people to figure out, what did they want to have happen with their remains afterwards. So we see the ability for someone to choose what they want to have happen is much broader than it ever was. And I think people are thinking about it much more creatively, and they want to do different things and are able to in a way that they couldn't do before. We're looking at some options that are, and these are new. We don't necessarily have them in BC yet, but things like composting, aquamation, looking at other ways that maybe are easier on the environment. So that's becoming an issue now when we think about cremation and the kind of energy it takes. But there are, everybody does it differently, and everybody does whatever they want. And I don't think that people feel as limited as they might have, and sort of felt like the only option was to go to a funeral home, maybe the funeral home that your family, has gone to before. And so the options around where you might want your ashes to go, within reason. I mean, I think you always have to check and make sure that you're allowed to scatter ashes, but the way that people end up in gardens or in water or whatever it happens to be, those, I think it's more, the possibilities are there, and that's what's changed more than anything else in the last little while.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So to Jen, what role do families and friends play in making someone's end of life meaningful?
That's a great question. And I think that since COVID, things have definitely changed. But I see an opportunity to be creative. And I think that the more a family is involved and is creating something specific and unique to that person's life that just honors that, I think that this time, even though we're separated, it can allow us to take the time and really think about how can we do this well, making sure that we're following whatever they've designated in the will, because that's where you say what to do with your body after, and the executor is involved in that. But having the time right now to really do things well. The one thing that I would advise against is people are tending to put funerals off at this time. I just heard a story yesterday from someone whose aunt had died in March, and they just buried her last week because of COVID and because the family couldn't get together. And in those cases, a lot of times the grief and bereavement process can't start. It's unfinished business. And I'm not saying that you have to get out there and do things right away, but I would encourage people to not put those things on hold, because you really do want that grieving process to start. I can share one really neat thing that I've seen. People I've got lots of stories if you want stories as well. But one thing that I saw during COVID was a man had passed, and he was cremated, and they weren't really able to come together. But he was a hunter, and he had 6 hunting buddies that he would go with, and they actually had his ashes put into bullets, and they separated, socially distanced, separated 7 seats. The last seat was his seat with his gun, and in the bullets were his ashes, and they shot 77 rounds of his ashes off, because it would have been his 77th birthday. And I thought, wow, what a great way to honor this man's life and really work through that, in a safe way, where people can come together. And I think that this time, as bad as it is sometimes with the separation, it really does give us that opportunity to become really creative, give people options, and yeah, like lots of online funerals are happening right now. I've attended a couple, and people who live in Europe and England wouldn't been able to come over for this funeral in a regular day. And I'm seeing lots of long lost family members attending funerals that they probably wouldn't have. So there are definitely some gems in this dark, dark time.
Yeah, I think that's super meaningful. It's a really great story that you shared. So Cindy, how can families commemorate the passing of a loved one who is not religious, but accommodate the members of the family that might be?
Yeah, it can be a challenge, and honestly, it's one that I have in my own family. And so my mother, who is religious, and she just has a different view than we have. And so we've made plans. She's told us what she wants. My family's always been very, very open about death and about what everybody wants and sort of how we want this to happen. And so we have conversations about it. And what we have determined with my mom in particular is that she will absolutely get what she wants. She's decided, and she sort of said what she wants, and that part of that is going to involve a church service. But then we had the conversation about what makes sense for us and the way that we would like to celebrate her life, which is a more personal way. And so we've made plans with her on how to do that. I think it's the communication with the family. And so if you can honestly say, and this is part of the planning, right? So this is part of the discussion and part of the planning. If you can honestly say in advance, I love you, and this is the way that I would like to commemorate your life, then those conversations, then it can be easier if you're comfortable having those conversations. But I will say that the challenge is finding the right time to have those conversations, right? So it's not something where you just want to leap in and slam it down and say, look, this is what I want you to do, but everybody needs to give a little bit. There are some that say, well, after you're gone, it won't matter. You're not going to be here, so we'll do whatever we want. But I think that there's a level of respect and compassion for the individual that has to be acknowledged. And again, it's not always easy, and we don't always get what we want. Death is much like life, right? We don't always get what we want. And so I think that combining, so just going back to the specific question, I think combining those two things, combining the piece that for our circumstances my mother wants, but then also bringing in the part that we think is going to be really meaningful, which is a little bit more of a celebration of her that's very personal. It will be very personal. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very great to hear a very personal perspective on that. So Jen, what types of emotional support are present for non-religious families, or not for non-religious people?
Well, there's all sorts of emotional supports out there that are non-denominational. You can find those through the biggest place where I would send clients to have a look is the BC Bereavement Line, which has lots of resources. Also looking at BC 211, they are a very underutilized resource, but it does have lots of grief and bereavement supports there. I don't know much more to say about that one.
Jennifer, there's something that I've become aware of through this app, and I actually used it for a friend of mine, and it's called Grief Coach. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Grief Coach, right? And sort of this ongoing support, helping you. It can help you if you've lost someone, but also in the way that I used it for my best friend who lost her mother, her brother, and her brother-in-law in a very, very short period of time. And I didn't know how to support her. And I thought, I need support to be a support. And so signed up for that app. And I think that's another way that things are changing, and the way we're using technology in different ways to support people. So.
Yeah, thanks. I forgot about that one, but there's a couple of different apps that you can use. But Grief Coach, what it does is it reminds you to check in on your friend, and what to say and what not to say. So, yeah.
That sounds like a really great resource. Speaking of resources, Cindy, would you like to tell us about the All Ready to Go kit and why the Memorial Society of BC created it?
I would love to tell you about it, because I think it's a really, really good resource. And it was a collaborative effort. There are other people in the community that helped with that for sure, and that provided the initial kind of impetus to get it going. And I just want to sort of give credit where credit's due. It's all about planning. And sometimes when you go and you approach it and you say, well, I don't know where to start and I don't know what to do, the All Ready to Go kit is really meant to give you the groundwork, the foundational pieces for your planning and how you can get everything in order. So things like, where are all your bank accounts? Where's your will? Those are sort of basic pieces. But then other things like, do you want certain things to happen after you go? You're going to put most of this in your will, but you may have other things that you want to have directed in certain ways. You might have in the binder, you might have your advance directive. You might have anything that will help when you go. And so this binder is something that was created with the idea that if we give people the tools to start and give them a place to start, then they're going to create this for themselves. It's going to be a support for the family, because when you work through the binder, you're going to be able to talk to the rest of your family about it as you're creating it. And so the idea is, again, to support not only the person who passes, but also the family that's left behind, the family and the friends perhaps that are left behind, and to give people a place to start, and that people will add to it as they want to add to it. And if you give me a minute, I'll walk through sort of the different pieces of it. So if you want to go, can we come back to that in a minute? Because and anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about it can go to our website and take a look at it on the website.
Yeah, do you want me to come back to you after the next question for Jennifer?
Yes, please, that would be great.
Perfect. So Jennifer, as an end-of-life doula, what do you consider the most important part of your role in the end of someone's life?
That's a great question. And most people would say that it is to provide vigiling support, which is untrue. I hardly ever get called into vigil, actually. I think that initiating the conversations and pre-planning and letting people know their options and educating them are very important. The biggest thing that I do is I listen. And I listen very mindfully and intently. I set my intentions that I'm there to listen to them, because it is proven and it's theorized and it's written about that people need witnessing. People need to know that they've been seen and heard. And they need to know that someone hears what they're going through. They're sitting with them with their struggles. They're sitting with them with their fears, their grief, their guilt, and just being able to hold that on with them for a little while, and then making sure that I do lots of self-care and making sure I have some boundaries about what pieces of that I want to bring home, because you really don't want to bring that home. People think all the time that this is a really hard job. It has to be depressing. Oh, I wouldn't be able to do that work. But this is the most empowering and rewarding job that I have ever had. And if you do it well and you don't take all that sorrow home and you see those golden nuggets and you're able to assist people into having and creating those beautiful moments, then you've done a good job. And I always say that if I don't get called into vigil, I've done a good job as well, because that way I know that the family feels that they're prepared to do it for them, because I think it would be way more meaningful to have a family member or a friend there and in the end supporting them than myself. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very great thing to hear. So Cindy, you had something you wanted to touch on?
I just wanted to walk through sort of the different sections. So there's 12 sections in the binder, and this will just give people an idea of the kinds of things. And even if you sort of for yourself want to think about, okay, what are the pieces I should gather together to help my family, and then have this in a place where it's easily accessible. So last will and testament, power of attorney, representation agreement, advance care directives, memorial society funeral arrangement form, the celebration of life plan, life insurance policy, and the recap of life insurance policies. If in fact it is going to be a death in the home, then expected letter of death in the home. People to call list, this is really important. Sometimes you don't think about it, but people to call. So who do you want to know? If you do have family, far away, or old friends, maybe it's really good to have them on the list. A list of financial holdings, super helpful. Copies of personal identification. And then the last piece is a last reviewed record. And this is just the record of when the All Ready to Go binder was reviewed, so that people know that it's been looked at, like how recently was it looked at? Because of course, if we go through major life changes, maybe some things need to be updated. But it's really good to know when it was last reviewed. And then the goal would be to keep this in a place where it's easily accessible. And one of the suggestions that we have is you could somehow, you could put a note, in the green sleeve that you have on your fridge, that has, if you have DNR orders and advanced care directives and that sort of thing. If you have one of those on the fridge, you could leave a note in there about where to find the All Ready to Go binder as well. And we have those available at our office and can send them out as well. So that's the kind of thing that you would want to be thinking about, and that's where the All Ready to Go binder gets you kind of thinking about these pieces and pulling them together. And if there is any anxiety around being prepared, it really helps to have something like this, right? You do definitely feel empowered, and it does make a difference, really, and for the family too.
Yeah, definitely. I do have a question for you as well, Cindy. So how can people protect themselves and their families from financial burdens related to the end of their lives?
Plan in advance. Plan in advance. We are huge proponents of sort of pre-arranging, pre-planning. We are not big fans of prepaying. So one of the main reasons for that is because you're not around to make sure you get what you paid for, right? Things change, and you don't necessarily, I think it's the number for prepayment to funeral homes for services, I think something like 20% of all of them go unclaimed. And we're talking, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? But from a personal perspective, make sure that you let everyone know what you want in the way, like through your All Ready to Go binder, through conversations with your family, write it down, whatever it happens to be, become a member of the society. We will take your arrangement. We have an arrangement form. You can put what you want on the form. We'll keep that on file, and be really clear about what it is that you want. If you want the basic cremation, then have that, and communicate, plan. It can be a huge burden. Part of the challenge of the death, the industry itself, is that it's a sales machine. And so if you think about the most vulnerable times in your life, well, one of them is when you are grieving, right? And so in order to protect our families, I think the planning is the most important thing. Again, let people know what it is you want. Be really clear about it. The society, what we do is we contract, and we contract with independent service providers. And we ensure that they are compassionate and ethical, and that they provide good pricing for our members as well. So that's part of the services that we provide. So not only will we keep what you want on file, but when the time comes and the call is made to the Memorial Society because someone's a member, what we actually do is direct you to the service provider in your area that the Memorial Society is contracted with, and they give preferential pricing to members. That was a really, really long answer.
Oh, that was a really, really thorough answer as well. I think that was really well done.
I just wanted to add on to that. Shop around, because you don't have to use the funeral home. If you don't go with Memorial Society, sorry, they can. There's a plug for you here. But if you don't, shop around. You do not have to use the funeral home in your area, the one that everybody's always used. Find one that is upfront, that posts their costs on their website. In BC, they are legally bound to give you all their prices upfront. They are not allowed to upsell on the floor. Wouldn't you want the best for your mom or whoever?
Yeah.
They're not allowed to play on your emotions, but just make sure that you do go with a funeral provider that you're comfortable with. There are so many great ones in the Lower Mainland I would go and talk to 3 of them, but don't talk to 3 of them at the time of death. Talk to them now.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I think it goes back to the sort of educating yourself and figuring out, what you're comfortable with. And you will learn something as you go through the process. You will learn something. You either learn that there's something you really don't want to do, or you may discover that there's something that you really do want to do. But it is absolutely 100% shop around. Yeah. Or be a member. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to price compare. And so we have a question for Sophie. So can you speak to the significance of the recent legislation passed by referendum in New Zealand on medical assistance in dying, and also the proposed bill that is in front of Parliament right now? Just like the importance of it.
Yeah, so the humanist perspective of it is really that these are bills, and any time in the world that someone gains a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more choice about their end of life care, that is a good thing. It's also a really compassionate response to suffering and compassionate response to people's desire to be able to control what happens to them at their end of life, because it's a really scary thing. It also offers a lot of comfort to people who may be experiencing a lot of pain with a chronic disease or a degenerative disease, that they know that option will be there for them at their end of life. So those are 2 really positive things that humanists can hold and remember. And in New Zealand, it really goes to show that even though medical assistance in dying is a very new thing and only available to a very small amount of people around the world, the conversation is growing. And even if more countries aren't legalizing it, which the BCHA would hope is being done, but even if that isn't happening, the conversation is growing. And even just those little news articles being sent out around the world that New Zealand is legalizing it really makes people think about their own end of life and how they can plan for that.
Totally. So we have a question that was submitted via email before the event, and any of our speakers can jump in to answer this, whoever feels like they have something to say. So the question is, how can we open the discussion of death, and why it's important that we do talk about it, and why is it important that we get comfortable talking about death?
Wow, because it's not going anywhere, right? Like I think it the more that we talk about it, the more that we accept it. I really loved how Jennifer framed the potential for, I don't know if you use the word acceptance, but I heard kind of beauty in passing, and to me that, I guess it indicates some kind of acceptance as well. And so for our own peaceful purposes as human beings, I think it's an important conversation to have, and to also to look after one another. It's a way of looking after one another.
Yeah, definitely. The language that we use around death and dying and using the real words helps people get comfortable. I don't like to say you've lost someone or someone's passed. Use the real words and open the conversations organically. So right now we're in this perfect position with COVID to have open conversations about death and dying. When medical assistance in dying came out, that was a perfect time to have conversations about end of life and death and dying, and doing it so that we're framing it in a way that isn't all ugly and yucky and in the ER or in the ICU full of tubes and needles and things. It doesn't have to be like that. I have witnessed so many beautiful deaths, even since COVID. I've had 2 clients of mine use medical assistance in dying since COVID. So the program is still running. One example, like I said, I'm full of stories and I love to tell stories, and I always get permission. But I had a client who died in a park in Vancouver, next to the river, surrounded by 6 friends, social distanced, in the wilderness. And that was able to happen because the parks were closed at the time, actually, and the city allowed for that to happen there. And that was a beautiful event for this person. So yeah, using these natural, organic times. I always tell people when they're coming through my program, tell people that you're taking the program. Let them think that you're crazy. Get the conversation started. It doesn't matter why it starts. It matters that it has started.
Absolutely. So one more question before we switch into the questions that have been submitted by everyone here today. So besides those already mentioned, what are some resources that you've liked on this subject of end of life? And is there anyone doing work in this field that inspires you, or is there work you'd like to see?
So I would say there's a couple of books I think that are really important, and coming at it from the perspective of a consumer advocacy organization who's looking at end of life and death and dying, and how can we support people to make sort of good decisions. There's a couple of books that I think are amazing, just to talk about the history of funeral planning. And this, I'm going to hold it up because I brought it with me, but it's Doug Smith, The Big Death, and I learned so much. I learned so much from that book, and it gave me a really good. I even learned about the society, actually, because we're in there, and it talks about the history with the Unitarian Church and how all these things came about. So for me, that history and understanding that in my role at the organization, at the society, is really, really important. It's less about support around death and dying. I think I already mentioned. I already mentioned the death coach grief coach, but I think that the education side of things, if I have any more and think of any more, I'll certainly share them. But for me, that was a really interesting one, just around the history of funerals and funeral planning, right? And why we sometimes feel forced to. Sometimes we make the decisions automatically without thinking about them, when we can give them some thought now.
Yeah, this whole bookshelf behind me are all books on death and dying, and I don't know. I'm thinking, which one should I pull? And because there's so many great books out there. My favorite book, my mentor in doing this work, is Mitch Albom, Tuesdays with Maury. That was a book that really got me going into being a doula. And it's an old one. There's lots of great old books. Most of my favorite books that are on that shelf are from the 1970s, and they are still relevant today. Ram Dass, Patch Adams. Those books are still relevant, and they're still there. And it's about human kindness and taking care of each other and compassion. And I think those are the things that we need in today, and that doesn't get old. For resources, I'm just thinking, because we're on the internet more, my favorite resource still is the Government of BC website. And it is great. It's www.gov.bc.ca, and you can type anything in there. Funeral expenses, bereavement leave, caregiver leave, home care, funeral planning, estate planning, anything that you want, you can find on that government website. We have done a fantastic job here in BC of organizing all of the information and putting it on one website. I'm always about getting the information from the horse's mouth. Like, you really do want to get it from the people who are going to provide the service. So the government websites, the health authority websites, really make sure that you get your information from the correct website. I mean, it's great to read a book that makes you feel good, but then you realize that the book was written in the UK and those things aren't actually happening here. So look what you've got right in front of you and utilize them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We've got links to all sorts of different things on our website, loads of government, and that's exactly it, right? If you want the source, just go to the source, right? And there's lots of information that you wouldn't necessarily think that you might find there, but that search has got really, really good options.
But who thinks to go to the government website for grief and bereavement resources? Like, seriously.
Yeah.
But there's so much on there, so much.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add that I really look forward to, as this conversation evolves and opens, I hope that we receive and we facilitate more discussions about cross-cultural perspectives on death. And there's been a little bit of integration of Indigenous perspectives and elder circles in consultations for medical assistance in dying, but I'm very curious to see how that changes with new legislation, and also in New Zealand with the Maori people, and how that engagement comes into play. And I think Canada is a multicultural society. It's very interesting and very important to learn about how other people see death, and how other people see the choice to die through an assisted death. And I think as we gather that information and we integrate it into our perspectives, it's a very important piece of it. And also, I'll also just, this book right here, The Little Book of Humanism, by Andrew Copson, and Alice Roberts, the presidents of Humanist UK and Humanist International, have a fantastic section in this book, talking a little bit about what it means to be humanist and think about your death, how important it is to think about your mortality. And I just really love a few of the poems and a few of the sections. And I think that we also have a few quotes from that in the audiobook section as well, of the End of Life Guide and the Memorials and Grief Guide.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Living My Culture is a great resource for looking at different cultures and different cultural aspects. And they've just added one for Indigenous people. It's called Circle of Care. There is actually an Indigenous end of life guide, and I've had the honor to go into 41 different reserves around BC and have trained well over 100 community members in how to take care of their own loved ones at home the way they want. And it's just a fantastic thing. That's my heart work, is working in First Nations communities with Douglas College and FNHA's partnership to bring this education to community members. So there is some great resources out there. There's also some great BIPOC and LGBTQ plus resources for people who might experience death a little bit different. I remember I had a client who had transformed or transitioned. Transformed is a different word. Transitioned, and the family around them didn't know that, and there was going to be a lot of conversations around that. So it was really interesting time, and it's really important to remember that we need to support everyone and love everyone well. no matter where they're at.
I'll also add that there are specific LGBTQ death planning workshops in Vancouver put on by Krista Ovenel. And those are really interesting for people living from that perspective and wanting to integrate partners into their experience, or adopted children, or just have a different perspective of death and a different experience about living with their family and having their own perspectives be integrated into that and parts of themselves. Yeah.
Thank you guys. That's a very comprehensive amount of resources. And I think everyone watching definitely has a lot to take away from that. So our first question submitted in the chat is from Alex, and it's for Cindy. So Alex says, do you have a peer grief support group for individuals who have gone through a family death? Is there something specifically for families who have gone through a maid death?
So for what we do is we go up until we were talking about this earlier, I think, when we were talking about this panel, is sort of the different places where organizations come in. And so for us, we are there until the point of death. Beyond that, we don't provide services, and we don't have a role. So we are the planning. We are the leading up to and supporting people and helping them make the decisions and sort of financial decisions and consumer decisions. But beyond that, that's not sort of our area of expertise. So I don't have anything to offer you, Alex. I'm sorry, but I bet somebody else here does.
Well, I think I mentioned the group Bridge C14, and maybe Sophie or Emily can share that with the group later. And that is a support group just for family members who have had someone die by medical assistance in dying. We, you know, Cindy and I are both still beating the drum about planning, and that's something that I ask families before the death has even occurred. Is I ask them, what kind of supports have you used in the past and what worked? Because sometimes going to a support group didn't work. You know, that type of support didn't work. Maybe one-on-one doesn't work. Maybe you know, really thinking about those things in advance and identifying those, and even making that list beforehand so that when they need to reach out, that's already available. And as a doula myself, I always ask everybody, I encourage all of my doulas to check and make sure that that resource is relevant and still around, because if that person's got the energy up to reach out for help and they call the hospice or wherever they call and that grief group doesn't exist anymore, that person could become very defeated and may not reach out to anyone else. So do your research before and think about what's worked, what's not worked, and really make sure that it's unique to that person that's going to that it's going to support.
Yeah, I think those are both very good answers. So our next question is from Murray, and I think probably to Sophie, but to anyone who wants to answer. So what are potential changes to dying with dignity provisions in the future in regards to people with Alzheimer's?
That's a really fantastic question. Definitely not something that I can speak to directly. It's very complicated because there is a high bar for a capacity to consent. Now, the way that it would have to work would be someone before they were unable to consent would have to have an advance directive saying that as part of their care plan, they wish to make medical assistance in dying part of their end of life. Now, that can be reversed in many different ways by the person's choice, or if the doctors believe it's no longer an option or the best option for this person. So it's very tricky because a lot of people die with some level of dementia or of Alzheimer's, and that's just not something, unfortunately, that can be clarified right now. It's a really great question, and I think about it a lot because I wish that I could offer it or provide more education on that, because it causes so much stress and so much grief for people. But the very short answer right now is that it's unfortunately just not on the table if someone is already living with Alzheimer's.
Did anybody else want to speak to that at all, or? No? Okay, we'll move on. So Eric asks, I'm curious about green burials. How long does it take for a body to return to the earth? And afterwards, does this mean that the space is available for another green burial? I'm thinking of specific sites like the one in Victoria that provides an area for green burials. I'm not sure if anyone's expertise speaks to this, but does anyone have any thoughts on this question?
I wish I had the specific answers to that, because I think it's really interesting, and I think it'll become more and more interesting for people. If I remember, I've done a little bit of reading on it, and if I remember correctly, there is actually a certain amount of time up until the point where you would be able to put another body in, but I don't have the specifics. I think it's really, there's so many interesting things to be looking at, sort of that, composting, acclimation, those things that I mentioned before, that we would like to, the society would like to do more research on and provide more information about. So that's part of our role, is educating, and hopefully we'll be able to do that.
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of a difference between composting and a green burial. And what you're saying, Eric, I think it leans a little bit more towards the human composting, which is legal in United States, in Washington, which is closer than some of the cremations that you would have if you live closer to Surrey or White Rock, where most cremations happen in Squamish and Maple Ridge, and people don't realize that. So it might be faster for you to go across the border, but it is legal now in Washington State. And human composting, they do accelerate the breakdown because of the organic matter that is added. So there is a quicker time frame where they would put someone on top, and basically once that all works its way down, the family has the option to take some of that organic material home. I'm not sure about getting it across the border. I know you can get yourself across the border, whether you have a passport or not. So sometimes that's a fun little kick in the pants. I don't know if anybody wants to go across the border these days. But that is something that's definitely viable for people in British Columbia because of the access to the Washington. So for green burial, there's 5 principles of a green burial if you're not sure. Number 1 is no embalming. Number 2 is direct burial to the earth. Number 3 is ecological preservation and conservation. So they need to use this area to grow things that would have happened indigenously. So they're growing and they're using this land. They're really utilizing it. And number 4 is communal memorialization. So it is used as a park. It is used as something else. You're not walking through there. There's a stone or a bench with names and whatnot. And then optimize land use. So for example, if you go down to Heritage Gardens, the parts of the green burial section that they have down there, they're farming it right now because they want to use the land. As for breakdown in each person is different, because you can have a person go from full body to skeleton in 12 days in the right condition. But in a different condition, it could take months or even years. I mean, you got to think about things. If it's a hot, balmy 42 degrees in downtown Vancouver and you're in a green burial, you're going to break down a lot quicker than if you were buried in February. So, and it depends on what you were dying from or how long you've been dying, what medication you were using. So many factors. That's my little 2 cents on the whole thing. Totally into composting. I would love to be composted. Alkaline hydrolysis is cremation by water, and it's not going to happen in BC anytime soon. It is legal in different provinces, but if you're flying your body to another province to use alkaline hydrolysis, you're probably doing it for environmental reasons. Well, you should probably look at the fossil fuels that are being used to fly you over there. But I just taught about burials yesterday, so I'm up on my information and I have my resources right next to me. So there you go.
All right, yeah. Our next question is a question from Patricia, and she shares a very personal message. So first she asks, how can she become involved in the advanced directive advocacy for MAID? She shares that her husband had brain cancer, so he was exempt from being able to choose MAID.
Join an advocacy group like Dying with Dignity. That would be my my suggestion. And I'm sorry about your husband, Patricia.
Mm-hmm. And I think she sent a different question to Sophie. Would you like to say that now, Sophie?
Patricia asked a fabulous question, talking about how do humanists fit into grief support groups where many people might be religious. And I choose to use the word religious because some humanists feel that they are spiritual and some humanists feel that they are not. And spiritual can just refer to your relationship with something greater than you. So in my case, I would identify as spiritual, but that I feel spiritual with the nature that lives around me and interacting with science and interacting with nature and wild animals and feeling that as a part of me and a part of my life on this earth. So I would encourage her to explore groups like Grief Beyond Belief, who are really fabulous. And there's a little bit of a blurb about them in the Grief and Memorials Guide. It's very tricky to start your own group, but I would absolutely encourage you to do so. Facebook groups are a really great resource. And also Reddit pages are also really great. So Reddit is a social media site where anyone can post and provide lots of support. So the Humanist Reddit is quite good. And I believe that Grief Beyond Belief also has one as well. So definitely check out our memorials and grief guide. Obviously, those are all free on our website, provides a little bit more information about emotional support. Another person to chat to is a non-religious pastoral carer, which is a very interesting field within humanism. And those people can talk a lot about death and grieving people's relationships with it from a secular perspective and helping you really explore your own identity with that. And there's so much diversity in humanism of beliefs that really delving into how you feel about that is so important.
Absolutely. Does anyone want to speak to Patricia's question other than Sophie? No? All right. So our next question is from Barry. She says for Jennifer, but if anyone afterward would like to speak to it as well, floor is open. So she says, as an end-of-life doula, how do you provide support for a person who is unable to communicate effectively through disability? For example, Parkinson's sufferers cannot speak audibly. People with damaged vocal cords through inept insertion of stomach tubes are unable to speak. Both of these experiences are both of these examples are personal family experiences.
Communication is not just words. You can communicate with the way you look at someone. I can hold space for someone by simply holding eye contact with them. I have had clients who were competent and cognitive, because that is key. Once a person that I'm supporting becomes unable to make their own medical decisions, I support I still support them, but I support them by supporting their family and their representative, whoever they deem that to be in their advanced care plan. But I have had clients who have lost their ability to speak, but still had competency. And we were very creative with, iPads or through email. I had one man who wore an eye reader, so he could type words with his. It was like so fascinating, this technology. He could send me an email just by using his eyes. So there are other options for being able to support someone, as long as there's competency. And I think technology is just fascinating for this stuff. There's so many great resources. And I have had clients who were deaf or hard of hearing, and I have 3 ASL doulas as well. And I have doulas who speak a different language because sometimes there's a language barrier. So there's options.
That's really awesome, like accessibility that you have ASL and bilingual doulas. But yeah, our next question is for everyone. So it's from Jurgen, who asks, what would you, Cindy and Jennifer, do if a person came to you and said that they wanted your support to die peacefully and painlessly, but like most today in Canada looking for that, we're not eligible for MAID?
I think, I mean, as the setting aside the role of the society, right? Because that wouldn't be something that we would support people around. It's just not our mandate. It's not our mission, if you will. But I think that what I would do personally is I think that I would I'd probably try to connect with someone like Jennifer to have the conversation about what are the possibilities, what can we do, and then seek guidance around learning more, getting more education again, and trying to learn as much as possible so that I would want to support the person. I mean, that would be my goal, would be to support the person in the best way possible. But I speak to that as a human being as opposed to sort of on the society's behalf, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Jorgen, for that question. First thing I would ask you is, do you know what the role of a doula is? Because I have been asked to participate in things that would not be legal here in BC, and I have to make sure that I stay in my scope of practice because of my position and because that's the right thing to do. So I don't do any harm. I will not assist you in any of that if that's what you're asking. But what I would ask you is, I'm looking at you, not in the camera now, so sorry. What I would ask is, what does that mean for you? What does it mean to die peacefully? And what would your gold star death be? And how can we help you achieve that if you're not eligible for medical assistance in dying? Can we still get a level, get on some sort of level with that? Can we help you to achieve some of that? And what are your expectations of me? Because I do have clients who would, I do have one client right now who would love nothing more than to be eligible for medical assistance in dying, and they're not. You're right in that some medical diseases are not qualifiers for medical assistance in dying. Age is not a qualifier for medical assistance in dying. So we sit with that, and we get on a level where we're okay with where we're at. Yeah. Thanks. I hope I helped a little bit, but we're not going to go down by the river and do anything illegal.
I would also add, just to what Jennifer said, I think that's a perfect answer, is exploring why they want that experience for their end of life, and does it mean that they choose to die with their family and friends and they believe that that's an important component, or is it because they really want control over the situation, or what is it that's attractive to them about an assisted death and about that wish for themselves, and trying to integrate that into their own experience. So, making sure that they're never alone and having family at every moment, or having someone where the whole time until they pass away peacefully, or really designing that space for themselves in a way that is comforting, and that could offer them some control over it. Because often we all want to have that autonomy and to be able to express that. And there is absolutely a way to still be able to have that autonomy and enact that, even if you're not receiving an assisted death.
Absolutely. That's a great add-on to what I said, Sophie. Way better than going down by the river. I'm sorry.
On that note, we have time for just one more question, and I'll just wait a second if anyone wants to submit that. But in the meantime, is there anything that I didn't ask you, our speakers, that you'd like to mention or speak to before the event is over?
I just would like to say that no matter what someone's beliefs are, whether they're humanist, Christian, atheist, LGBTQ, you know, what culture they come from, our approach as doulas is that we meet the person where they're at, and we can support anyone. I've had numerous clients that have had different backgrounds than myself, and it's really fascinating to find out what that means to them and being able to walk that walk with them, even though we might not share the same beliefs. So that's just something I just wanted to share.
And I think that's really lovely, and comes from the same perspective that we do, is we want to figure out, you know, how can we do our work in a way that supports everybody, regardless of where they're coming from, regardless of what their backgrounds might be, what their experience might be. What does that look like? And yet we're doing it in a, you know, sort of in a very different way and coming at it from someplace different. But there are all these pieces of this puzzle that fit together, and that the conversations that we have will hopefully, and I think about this, Sophie, in terms of the public engagement around MAID and some of the, you know, culturally, who's contributing, right? Who's contributing to these conversations, and are the right people. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean the professionals. I mean the people who it really impacts. Are we hearing? Are we getting the information that we need to help them and to put the supports in place, right? Regardless of whether it's before, leading up to the point of death, at death, or after death. So I really appreciate being a part of this discussion. I've learned so much. Thank you very much. I mean, I have learned a ton, but it is an important piece, right? That we have these conversations.
I would also just share, just so everyone knows, the resources that are available to them through the BCHA and why we're doing this work and what we're providing. So just a few things very briefly that you can check out as you're gathering resources and taking notes and all that. So the BCHA has released the End of Life Guide. Then we're also doing this panel. And then there's also the Memorials and Grief Guide. And both of those are available in audiobook format for people who are unable to read or want to listen to it on Spotify on their drive to work. That's an option. It's a fun little podcast. And we'll also be releasing some legislative and government related things. So we're submitting a brief to talk about and to advocate on behalf of people receiving MAID. And we've also written a blog post recently, just talking a little bit about what the changes to the law mean. They're specifically changes to the criminal code, not to Canada Health Act or anything like that. So it is pretty specific. So just a couple things to remember, and just keep informed and check out what we continue to do. We're very proud of it, and we're happy for people to be receiving those resources that are very specific to their background and their beliefs.
Absolutely. And everything Sophie just mentioned can be found on our website, which is bchumanist.ca. Yeah, thank you everyone so much for coming. Thank you, of course, to our panelists for spending so much of their time diving into such a deep and like pretty emotionally packed conversation on like a tough topic. Really appreciate you sharing your experience with us. And if there's any resources that any of you want to make sure that those watching today have access to, like links or anything like that, please definitely feel free to like add them on our Facebook page. We usually have the advertisements for the events. So you could just like add it either on the event page or in one of our posts about the event, just so it's easy for people to find. And anyone interested in future events or other information that we will be sharing in the near future on our medical assistance in dying campaign, you can follow our newsletter on our website. All right. Thanks everybody so much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.